The things we experienced this week that we thought we'd talk about, because I like connecting with you on manhood and like being a dad, and where our backgrounds are so similar, when we have differing views on things, I always like exploring that territory. But the John Bernthal, Joe Rogan had John Bernthal on his podcast, and I'm not sure if I'm saying his last name correctly.
Sounds right.
I'm not super tore up about it, even if I don't get it right.
He'll be all right.
Yeah, he'll be okay. And when he watches this podcast, because I'm sure he does, he'll be like, you know. I had no idea he was so interesting, or had like such an interesting past. His breakout role was The Walking Dead, but he went through this whole sprawling thing about getting this fight and turning his life around. To hear him talk about it, he was, you know, heavy into drinking, bar fights all the time, just like this butthole that you did not want to be around. And apparently it was a moment after he got into this fight about his dog that he punched this dude out, and the dude hit the concrete, and he was knocked unconscious, and the cops thought he was dying. The guy was going to die. He wasn't waking up. That John Bernthal, sitting there in the police station, he'd already had run-ins with cops while he was younger. He's having this like moment of, I'm either going one way or the other. If this dude it doesn't wake up, and it's, you know, manslaughter or whatever, I'm going to jail, and I'm going to have to be this evil version of myself just to make it. Mm-hmm. But then he says he looks up and says, if you just get me out of this, I swear I'll dedicate myself to my lady and to my craft and blah, blah, all this stuff. And he says a second later, the guy comes back and says the guy woke up from the fight. So in a way, it kind of felt like he was trying to witness to Joe Rogan a little bit, or talk about God, or maybe he's a faithful person, without necessarily like diving into like a "what do you believe" kind of conversation with Joe Rogan. What did it feel like to you? And because that story was kind of like a pivotal moment in the whole conversation.
I was a little bit torn just by the way that he worded it, you know, because he's like, he never said God.
Yeah.
And it was like, I looked up and I said, and he, you know, he's talking to somebody.
An entity.
You know? Yeah. He's like, and I dedicate, you know, myself to the right things and to you. You know, he's talking about God, but he never says God.
Yes.
And through the whole rest of the podcast, he doesn't say anything.
Joe Rogan
like
doesn't
that.
pressure him on it.
Right.
Which is interesting.
So, yeah, without saying, you know, that's kind of a roundabout way of like witnessing. Mm-hmm. Maybe I shouldn't, but I question where his actual faith is, you know, because it's like, okay, he believes in a God.
If he's more like agnostic or something like that.
it could be agnostic, you know, or anything really.
Well, then later
he doesn't even mention.
He shares a story about his friends, who one of them's a devout Muslim. Yeah. And the guy was going to go in and bomb the mosque, and that devout Muslim friend of his, she invites that guy to supper at her house, and that guy winds up becoming a devout Muslim, reading the Quran, becoming a devout Muslim, and leading that mosque or whatever it was. Like, yeah. So I don't know if he's Islamic, you know, if he subscribes to any faith.
Right. Yeah.
But it was very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting when you think about when somebody gets in that situation, like you said, a pivotal moment where they're like, you know, this even out of control, you know, it's out of their hands and they know it. Man, and it's like they look for, you know, people look for something else.
So many people have that rock bottom moment, and they have a Deus ex machina or whatever it's called, where they like pray for some divine intervention, and something happens. And so many people walk away from that without any kind of spirituality. Mm-hmm. Still in the same boat of, I'm an atheist and it is what it is. Wasn't that lucky?
Right.
When in my head, if you pray for an outcome and that's very specific outcome happens, it's much easier to believe the entity that you prayed to heard you and responded than it is you prayed and the coin flipped in your favor.
Right.
In a very specific way. Like with my back healing, and I know I go to it all the time, but I'm just still living in it. It's like that was a moment we were praying to a very specific entity, to Yahweh God, the Father of Jesus, for this specific thing in my lower back to occur, and it happens. And some people that if I shared that story with them, they'd be like, well, isn't that fortunate that now you know how to deal with your pain better or something? It's like, is it easier to believe that my body can just manifest some kind of healing on its own in the exact moment that I'm praying to some fake deity? Or is it easier to believe that this deity that I'm praying to answered my prayers like he recordedly had done for thousands of years?
Yeah.
It's just funny to me that somebody like John Bernthal has that moment, and you cannot tell whether or not he really adjusted his life in a faith direction, a spiritual direction. You can tell that it adjusted his life with discipline. He says from that point on, he was disciplined about his relationship and about, marriage and fatherhood and all these things that came later, and being an actor and all this stuff, and then all the doors open for him. He said a year later after that, and exactly a year later, he was on the set with The Walking Dead.
Yeah, we're talking about like the coincidence of praying to a god or someone, something.
Yes.
And then what you're praying for happens. How many times do those things happen when people don't pray? It's like, and you never hear people witnessing like, and just by coincidence, I got healed. You never hear that, right? Somebody's like, oh man, listen to what happened to me. Such a coincidence. It's like I whispered a prayer and this happened,
Yeah. And I didn't plan on this being like a super religious thing, but I've seen all this week, I've seen all these posts about how atheists in 2023, you bring them a pumpkin pie for the family get together for the holidays, and they're like, oh, this looks wonderful. And then you're like, you think it just baked itself? I bet there was a baker, wasn't there? And they're like, oh, how dare you? You still think there's a baker? And Joe Rogan's the type of guy that I feel like he accepts that there's some kind of spiritual realm out there that he don't understand. Because when you hear him talking about psychedelics and stuff like that, he definitely talks like he believes in some mysticism of some degree, but he just hasn't figured it out.
Yeah. So
he doesn't know. So he's just okay with accepting that there's some sort of dimension out there that he can't understand.
Yeah, I seen Neil deGrasse Tyson talk about Joe Rogan. He was like, Joe takes on these ideas and he just kind of fills in the blanks.
He very much does, man.
So, maybe he'll figure it out.
Well, so something that was interesting to me about their conversation, Joe Rogan and John Bernthal, is he talked about the cultural difference in Russia, like while he was over there, and how the Russians have this sort of, even though they don't necessarily agree with totalitarianism and they want freedom and democracy and all this, that rule with an iron fist kind of mentality, like our leader's a strong leader, is like still super respected over there.
Yeah.
It's like ingrained in their culture. He said there's no such things as lines. Like if you're waiting in line and somebody just cuts in front of you, like you either bow up and be like, hey, back, and shove them back, or they're just in front of you and it is what it is.
Yeah.
Because you weren't strong enough to.
It's like a mob mentality.
Yes.
Yeah. It's whoever gets to it first.
The dude, and Joe Rogan agrees with him. He says when he sees the fighters in the UFC who are from Russia, there's such a culture there of overcoming adversity and being strong and being tough and a nationalism, let's say, of representing your country. And he even says this: if you're a good artist, you're a Russian artist. If you're a good fighter, you're a Russian fighter. You know what I mean? Like, and he said that's not something necessarily that you have in the U.S. That kind of pride. He goes, even though when he comes to the U.S., John Bernthal was like, we live in the best country in the world, the freest, best country in the world. It's unreal.
Yeah. We even talked about like you can't say certain things. Like there are certain countries, you can't speak against the leaders, or you'll be like put to death or in jail or something like that.
When he talked about those playwrights that at a certain time during Stalin and all that stuff, that in the height of communism, he was talking about how everything was controlled by the state, including the theaters. So if you did anything that you produced had to be pro-state or you're in trouble. And he was talking about how these certain Russian playwrights had done this same play over and over, and it had been like Stalin had seen it or whatever, and was like, this is amazing, this is wonderful, and they loved it. And then somebody somewhere, some critic said, I think there's some anti-state messages in there, and then those guys were executed.
Yeah.
Like,
one person's perspective and opinion.
We can't have that.
Yeah.
You know, like, it's amazing how different that culture is, and what we take for granted over here. But one thing he said really stuck with me. He raises his kids in a very safe, loving, affectionate, empathetic, affirming home, teaching them to be kind and generous and all this stuff. But then he says, but also what made him so tough, what made him so strong and resilient and committed to disciplines when he agreed to be disciplined about art and all. He said what made him have that was the adversity that he grew up with, and like the rough neighborhoods and getting into those fights and stuff. So he said he has to represent adversity to his kids. And that's something I'm trying to figure out. And so you as a dad, like, I'm like, did you ever have that moment where you felt like I need to represent some sort of adversity to my kids while being loving and kind, to where they have obstacles to overcome to prepare them for the world? Like, that was such a strange concept to me, but I felt like it was vital. That I don't know how to do that. Like, what does that look like as a dad?
Yeah, I've got 2 daughters, so I'm pretty much a softie when it comes to them. Yeah, whatever they wanted is what I tried to give them.
The adversity, adversity you represented for them was, what do you want, darling?
No, I mean, I think there's, and I don't know about adversity, but like definitely representing an authority.
Okay.
And the line of, yes, I'm here to nurture you and provide and protect you, but also there's a line that you got to cross that says there's also this authority where I've got to make sure you stay within the right lines.
With 3 younger boys, I always feel like there's times that I'm missing the mark. Like, even right now, like, we're talking and I've got my boys, they're playing some Nintendo, and I don't have them trapped there all day long, but it's like for 30 minutes or so, they're going to be back there playing Nintendo. Like, how do I create in a loving way hurdles and obstacles and adversity for them to bow up and overcome, to where they know what that feels like? You know, I've thought about sitting them in the garage in front of the punching bag and like have them yell at me things like, I'm going to knock you out or whatever, and like kind of get all their blood pumping, and then be like, all right, let's calm down. Let's get this back down. Let's see how it feels. But I don't know how to do that. Like, how you create that spirit of sort of adversity for your kids, especially. I got 3 boys. So it's like, I want them to be leaders. I want them to be conquerors, you know, and for all of you guys who think all masculinity is toxic, well, get over it. You know, I don't care. Flip to another podcast.
I think physical challenges are good. Not just like, let's go out and play, you know, and do something physical for fun, but like kind of like you mentioned with the punching bag, like have a set challenge for them to do. I don't know if you've heard of Jason Wilson. He runs the Cave of Adullam in Detroit.
I don't know him or the Cave of Adullam. Let's talk about this a second.
Yeah, so he's been on Joe Rogan's podcast. He's got a documentary that just came out last month. It's on ESPN Plus. He saw a need for young black boys in Detroit needing a strong example, and he deals a lot with that. So it's a martial arts studio, and he teaches them martial arts, but he also teaches them self-control. A big part of it is self-control. He checks on their grades. He's like, you know, fully into this kid's life, and they've got like a waiting list of kids trying to get into his classes.
Yeah.
If you ever see any of his videos online, it's brings you to tears to watch him communicate with these boys, because, you know, you can see his care, but also the way that he builds them up. And then he brings the family in there, and he makes the dad like fight. I'm getting choked up a little bit here. He makes the dad fight for his son. And it's
Dang,
powerful.
man. What was his name again?
Jason Wilson.
Jason Wilson. That's something people don't know, man. And you're a dad, so I know that you feel this, but dad to son, if they fall short, if they did not get everything out of a sport, or if they didn't excel, or they didn't do X, Y, and Z and get it right and crush it, you don't feel like it's their fault. You don't feel like it's because the ability's not in them, because in your head you're like, they can conquer the world. They're the toughest, brightest, smartest, coolest. So you feel like it has to be your fault. You know, or at least I do, where it's like, if he's not the best at basketball, it's not his fault, it's me. It's because I did not do it. I did not prepare him enough. And to think about now some of these boys that you're talking about, boys that, even some that don't have that father figure too.
Right.
To not have anybody in your corner promoting you from the bottom up, from when you're really young, and pushing you and pushing. And by promoting, that's what I mean. I don't mean coddling you and saying everything's going to be all right. I mean like pushing you in the ways that I said I don't even have figured out. Like, I wonder how to make my kids tough and strong and all these things, when all I want to do is hug them and love them. You know, I don't know how you do it, especially if you're not a faith-based person, if you're not a believer, if you're not raised in that structure. I don't know how you do. Like, how do you do it?
Yeah, I had the thought recently that kind of along those lines, as a parent, you know, you want success for your child in the future when they're grown. I had kind of played it out in my mind. If somebody asked me about raising kids, I would tell them, make them do things. Make them do things they don't want to do. Because that's that adversity you're talking about, you know. It's like, okay, start them on instruments, you know, musical lessons, and like this, and say, you know, this is what we're going to do right now. You're going to learn how to play an instrument of your choice. You know, you're going to learn how to use a paintbrush the correct way. You're going to learn how to build something with your hands. You know, you'll learn how to use tools. You know, set these things up that are skill-based, that they can really learn fast when they're young. Because when they get older, it's going to be very hard for them to pick it up.
Like
their interest is not going to be there.
They're like fresh Play-Doh.
Yes.
When they're young, you can just do whatever.
Yeah.
And I feel like over time, it's like the Play-Doh's been setting out.
Yeah.
Like it wants to bend, and then it just snaps.
Yeah.
If you're not constantly changing and adapting and molding it, like that to me, I agree with you. That to me is like the perfect example. Like, young minds are moldable, young people are moldable, and they can stretch to do things and learn how to do things. And I do feel like part of the reason me as an adult is that I feel like if there's something I want to get done, I can do it. It's not because I'm a dude. Like, most guys have that ingrained in them. If you had a dad at all, it's like, you got to figure it out. Like, there's the flat tire, you got to fix it. Like, it's just guyhood, you know, or manhood or whatever. It's like, you got to figure out how to do these things. You feel like you have to produce something. But one of the reasons why I feel like if there's something I need a challenge set before me, I'm going to go ahead and figure it out, is because I was, like you said, forced to do some things that I wasn't even interested in, you know, but I needed, and I made the choice to do them. Like learning how to do hardwood and work construction at a young age. I learned how to put things together, and there was a payday at the end, and that's how I bought my stuff and everything. It's like, I agree, dude, that is, yes, I agree with you 100%. In our house, it's like, you're going to try every sport, and the ones that you like the most, we're going to go. And I just had a conversation with my boys the other day that now they're both really solid basketball players for it's Pee Wee League, so nobody's a really solid basketball player, but they're doing the things they're supposed to, getting the rebounds, dribbling, scoring points in games, making good passes, doing good defense, hands where they're supposed to be. And I told them, I said, remember how when we first started about a year ago, you guys were terrible. And you could not make a basket. It was awful. And they're like, yeah. And we're like, is basketball more fun now that you're better at it, or is it fun to suck at it? And they're like, oh, it's way more fun now. And I'm like, exactly. Like, but you know how to get to point. Like, they're learning How do you get to point A to point B? And that
Right.
you can, that is possible. It's possible to get here, but it takes all these little things in between. I wish my parents had made me learn piano or something, man, when I was younger.
Yeah.
It was just because I decided I might want to play guitar or something that I picked up some music. If they'd made me learn piano when I was little, dude, the places I'd be right now. Would be here talking to you. No, I'm just kidding. So much about those conversations, the conversation Joe Rogan had with John Bernthal and then watching The Whale, so much of that made me take inventory of like my blessings and like what I do with my life and choices we're making. I wanted to talk about this for just a second, that you and I have a very, very similar background. But, we're both preachers' kids. I've said that 2 or 3 times while we're talking. We're both fathers. But I want to talk about how our faith, where you're at and your faith walk and where I'm at. Like I said, any of this we don't want to touch on and get too personal, and we don't have to. But I want to talk about it because I think the main thing that separates humans, in my opinion, is circumstance. I think that we're all like, there's this thing I subscribe to, is that we're all one choice away from being each other. At different times, like you're 1 or 2 choices away from being that guy. So like, don't judge so hard, or you know what I mean? Like,
As a single man now, instead of as a family man, I've been finding my way in a different way than I have ever been accustomed to.
Do you think as someone that approaches like that 30s, 40s mark as a man, what do you think is the most important thing that you have to have, like that you have to know in your life to keep going? Like, what's the most important thing? I'll say for me, it's purpose. I feel like as a man, the thing I've struggled with the most through my circumstances, good or bad, is purpose. Like wondering what my purpose is, feeling like I have a purpose. Because if I don't feel like I have purpose, that's when I've had the worst days of my life, regardless of my circumstance, is when me alone in my head begin to assume or believe that, which is a lie. I know it's a lie, but that idea that I have no reason or no purpose, that to me has given me the darkest days of my life in the past, however many, like decade, let's say, is when I would get alone with those thoughts. Even if I was on top of the mountain, even if I was celebrating a #1 single or whatever, if I got alone with myself and started working through thoughts of not having purpose, that would give me my darkest days any time.
Yeah, definitely. Purpose is big for me too. I don't know if it's the same for everybody. Like you said, like at a certain age or, situation, but for me personally, my personality, I guess, purpose is big because I'm one who likes service to others. So if I don't feel like I have that going on in my life, every day as a general part of my life, you do feel like you don't know what you're doing. It brings down your whole altitude. A lot of people, I'm sure it even puts into depression. And, you just get down on life in general if you don't have something to put your energy into.
I saw a meme, which means it's total bullcrap. But I saw this little meme that this little cartoon guy was pouring some water in this little bowl, and he's like, there's no meaning for my life. I'm so purposeless and useless. Like, I don't even know what I'm doing here. And he walked away. And these like 3 little pigeons come by and are drinking the water, and they're like, God bless whoever puts this water in this bowl every day. And it's like that reminder of, even when you feel like you don't have any purpose, whatever, you're something for somebody. I wonder why as men, I don't think it's culturally created. I think that we feel this need to be producing and contributing more than just the water in the bowl for the pigeons. I think it's harder for us to celebrate those tiny reasons for being, and it's harder for us to recognize them, I feel like. And so what you're saying is kind of like you feel like, and I could be wrong, but a big part of your purpose you felt like was uprooted when the things in your family dynamic shifted so much. It's like, holy crap, like this is what I was. Now all these labels are different and I'm wearing these new labels. And I connect with that some, not nearly to the degree. I'm not trying to belittle where the reinventing you've been doing, of yourself. But I connect with it some in the sense of how COVID just literally kind of just shut the whole band down.
Yeah.
And for a while I was like, what am I doing? I got nothing.
Yeah.
Well,
you do something for so long, and it's clear, it's clear what you're doing.
Yeah.
And then when that gets taken away, it's like, I don't have no idea where I'm at right now.
The immediate response is not to find the new thing. The immediate response is to cling to what was for as long as you can.
Yeah. It's safe and comfortable.
Yeah. And it's hard to just hold your nose and dive into the new thing.
Right.
And I'm not sure if it attacks women the way it attacks men. I don't know that it does. I feel like men, you have to feel like you have purpose, even outside of a job. And I feel like that's why men went to the workforce so hard, so fast, all the time, is because that was your purpose. You did this from 9 to 5, you come home, you brought the bread home, you supplied the home, blah, 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 whatever. It's like that was your purpose.
Right.
And I feel like now as those lines of those definitive lines of breadwinners and all this stuff and like these different ways to work from home and all this stuff, I feel like it is kind of made purpose harder to find. At least it has for me, And I know I always have purpose in God, and that's where I can say like the end of this year it's gotten better because I know God's like, hey, I have a purpose for the story. You being a storyteller, it's because somebody's going to need your story or need a story. You being empathetic with your kids because somebody's going to need you to sit and listen to them one day, and I can know that all of that is relevant, and that I can keep myself prepared for the moment when somebody needs something that God's got in me. So for me right now, it's like the day in, day out I may feel adrift sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I feel like it's preparing myself for a moment with somebody. But the down moments or the slow moments are designed for me to make choices like, okay, I'm either going to fill my well with some stuff that's ready to help somebody else, or I'm just going to get lost in this moment and be like, I don't feel like I have a purpose. Like, well, the purpose of this moment might be to help you gird up for, the opportunity in the future.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you like this clip from the Not Gospel Studios YouTube channel, don't forget to share. Click on one of the other links and videos. You can find them here and here, and subscribe. I think it's down here. Tell your friends about us. Tell them that it's healthy, that it's vegan, and all of those things. Keep being awesome because that's how God made you.